Before I tell you about the 9 terrifying rules that have kept me alive for 3 years working at York's most haunted pub, you need to understand something crucial about this ancient city. York isn't just old, it's layered. 2,000 years of continuous occupation, from Roman fortress to Viking stronghold to medieval powerhouse, and every era left its dead behind. My name is Thomas Hargreaves, and I've been the head bartender at the Blackfriars Rest for 3 years, not the tourist-friendly pub you'll find in the guidebooks. This is the other Blackfriars Rest, the one that's been serving drinks to the living and the dead since 1387. The one that exists in the shadows between York's cobbled streets, where history isn't just remembered, it's still happening. What I'm about to tell you isn't in any York ghost tour script. It's not mentioned in any travel guide or historical society pamphlet. This is the real York, the one that never stopped being medieval, where the past doesn't stay buried, and where some customers haven't left in over 600 years. You've heard about York being Britain's most haunted city. What they don't tell you is that some places in York aren't haunted, they're occupied. And the Blackfriars Rest has been occupied longer than most buildings have existed. What I'm about to tell you will sound absolutely mental, but I swear on the bones of every saint buried beneath York Minster, every word is true. Because when you serve drinks in a pub that's been standing since before the printing press was invented, you learn that history doesn't end, it just changes shifts. The Blackfriars Rest isn't easy to find. It's tucked away in a narrow alley off Stonegate, behind what looks like a private residence from the Tudor period. No bright pub signs, no tourist-friendly facade, just a heavy oak door with iron hinges that creak like they're in pain, and a small wooden plaque that simply reads, Est, 1387. Getting the job wasn't like applying to work at a normal pub. No online application, no CV required. The landlord, a man called Elmond Whitmore, who claims his family have owned the pub for 6 centuries, found me. I was working at a chain pub in Manchester, hating every minute of it, when he walked in and offered me a position I hadn't applied for. "You have that look," he said in an accent that sounded like it belonged in a BBC period drama. "The ability to see things that others might dismiss. York needs bartenders who understand that not all customers are contemporary." The pay was exceptional, 3 times what I was earning in Manchester, plus accommodation in a flat above the pub, plus benefits that included hazard compensation and temporal adjustment allowance. I should have asked more questions about those particular benefits. The Blackfriars Rest looks exactly as you'd expect a medieval pub to look. Low beam ceilings blackened by 6 centuries of smoke, uneven flagstone floors worn smooth by countless feet, walls thick enough to muffle any sound from the outside world. The bar itself is carved from a single piece of oak that's older than most countries. But it's the details that make you realise this isn't a theme pub or a historical recreation. The dust in the corners contain particles that predate the invention of glass. The shadows don't always match their sources, and the beer barrels in the cellar are connected to taps that never seem to run dry, no matter how much we serve. On my first day, Edmund handed me the standard employee handbook, a leather-bound manuscript written in multiple hands, multiple languages, multiple centuries of ink. Most employment manuals cover things like holiday entitlements and disciplinary protocols. This one started with rules of survival. "These aren't company policies," Edmund explained as he read through the manuscript. "These are survival protocols developed over 600 years of serving a very particular clientele." The rules were written in careful script. Some sections clearly added decades or centuries after others. Rule 1. Always serve the plague doctor his usual. He pays in coins that don't exist anymore. Rule 2. The Roman soldiers only drink wine. Never offer them ale and never ask them about their legion. Rule 3. If the Viking at table 7 starts singing death songs, evacuate the pub immediately. Rule 4. The black monk orders nothing but never leaves. This is normal. Rule 5. Children from the workhouse fire will ask for milk. We don't have milk. Give them water and they'll understand. Rule 6. When the clock strikes 13, stop serving everyone except the plague doctor. Rule 7. The woman in white always sits alone. Never approach her table. Never speak to her. Rule 8. If customers start paying with pre-decimal currency, check the date on the pub calendar. Rule 9. During the winter months, keep the fire burning. If it goes out, something else will provide warmth. I stared at the manuscript for 10 minutes, reading and rereading. This had to be some elaborate historical roleplay, a tourist attraction that took method acting to extremes. "Are you having me on?" I asked Edmund. His expression didn't change. "Thomas, you're not working at a normal pub. The Blackfriars Rest serves all of York's residents, past and present, the living and the persistently deceased." "You mean ghosts?" "I mean customers. Some happen to be dead, but they're all still customers. They still deserve quality service and a proper pint." That should have been my cue to leave, collect my things from Manchester and find a normal job serving nice normal living people. But the accommodation was excellent, the pay was extraordinary, and I've always been curious about York's supernatural reputation. Besides, how strange could it really be? My first week passed normally enough. The Blackfriars Rest during the day serves a steady stream of locals. People who live in York's historical centre, academics from the university, workers from the nearby shops, normal people, normal orders, normal conversations about weather and politics and football. But York pubs have always been different after dark, and the Blackfriars Rest after sunset is something else entirely. It was Thursday night of my second week when I encountered my first non-living customer. I was cleaning glasses behind the bar around 9:30 when the pub door opened. No creaking hinges, no footsteps, just the sudden awareness that someone had entered. A man walked to the bar, tall, wearing a long black coat that reached nearly to the floor. But it was his face that made my blood run cold. Pale white skin stretched tight over sharp bones, and a mask. Not a Halloween mask or a costume piece, a genuine medieval plague doctor's mask. Leather beak filled with herbs, glass eyepieces that reflected no light, straps that looked like they'd been made from human hair. He sat at the bar without a word. I stood there for 30 seconds, trying to process what I was seeing. This was either the most committed historical reenactor in Britain, or something much stranger. "What can I get you?" I asked, my voice smaller than I intended. "The usual," he replied. His voice was muffled by the mask, but underneath I could hear an accent that sounded distinctly medieval. Not fake medieval like actors use, but the real thing. The way English was spoken before it became modern. Rule 1 flashed through my memory. Always serve the plague doctor as usual. He pays in coins that don't exist anymore. But I had no idea what his usual was. "I'm new," I said. Could you remind me what that is?" The plague doctor tilted his head, studying me through those glass eyepieces. "Ale, dark ale, the kind that helps one forget the smell of death." I poured him a pint of our strongest dark ale, hands shaking slightly as I set it on the bar. He reached into his coat and produced a small leather pouch. From it, he counted out coins onto the bar. The coins were unlike anything I'd ever seen. Heavy, irregular shaped, bearing the image of kings I didn't recognise. Some had dates that made no sense: 1348, 1352, 1367, years when the plague was ravaging England. "Keep the change," the plague doctor said, lifting his mask just enough to drink. Underneath, I caught a glimpse of pale skin and lips that looked like they hadn't tasted air in centuries. He drank his ale in silence, occasionally making notes in a leather journal with a quill pen that shouldn't have been functional. After exactly 1 hour, he finished his drink, nodded to me, and walked out into the York night. I examined the coins he'd left. They felt real, looked authentic, but the dates were impossible. Currencies from the 14th century, in perfect condition, as if they'd been minted yesterday. Edmund found me the next morning, staring at the coins. "Your first medieval customer," he said with something like pride. "How did it go?" He paid with 600-year-old coins. "Dr. Morebus always does that. He's been coming here since 1387. Same table, same order, same payment method. He's very consistent." Dr. Morebus, plague doctor during the Black Death, lost more patients than he saved, including his own family. He's been studying diseases ever since, trying to understand what he couldn't prevent. He's been dead for 600 years. Technically, yes, but death is more a career change in York, especially for people who died with unfinished business. Edmund picked up one of the medieval coins. "These are perfectly legal tender, by the way. The Bank of England has a special department that handles pre-decimal supernatural currency. They exchange it for modern money at the historical exchange rates." That conversation should have convinced me to quit. Instead, it made me more curious. If York had a supernatural banking system, what else was I going to discover? Over the next month, I learned that the Blackfriars Rest served customers from across York's entire 2,000-year history. Romans who never left when the legions departed, Vikings who liked the city so much they decided to stay permanently, medieval monks who found death no impediment to their religious duties. Rule 2 became relevant during my 4th week. The Roman soldiers only drink wine, never offer them ale, and never ask them about their legion. They arrived on a Tuesday evening, 3 men in full Roman military dress, not costume reproductions, but the real thing. Authentic armour bearing scratches from battles fought 2 millennia ago, weapons that had drawn blood on Hadrian's wall, faces that carried the exhaustion of men who'd been on duty for far longer than any mortal tour. They took a corner table and spoke in rapid Latin, their conversation occasionally interrupted by arguments that sounded like they were discussing military strategy for campaigns they had ended before the birth of Christ. One of them approached the bar, stocky, scarred, with the bearing of a professional soldier who's seen too much combat. "Wine," he said in heavily accented English. "Your best wine, for free." I poured 3 glasses of our finest red wine, a bottle that Edmund had told me was reserved for special occasions and Pacific customers. "That'd be £18, I said. The Roman soldier looked puzzled. He reached into his purse and produced a handful of gold coins, proper Roman coins, bearing the images of emperors whose names I half remembered from school. "Will these suffice?" he asked. I accepted the payment, making a mental note to ask Edmund about the exchange rate for Roman currency. As I served their wine, I couldn't help but ask, "What legion are you with?" The soldier's expression darkened immediately. His companions stopped their conversation and turned to stare at me. The temperature in the pub dropped 10 degrees. "We do not discuss the legion," the soldier said quietly. Not with civilians, not with anyone. Rule 2 had warned me against asking, but I hadn't understood why. Now, seeing the pain in their ancient eyes, I began to understand. These weren't just dead Romans, they were Romans who had died badly, possibly dishonourably, and the memory still haunted them across 2,000 years. They drank their wine in silence after that, occasionally raising their glasses in toast to fallen comrades whose names were lost to history. When they left, they placed gold coins on the table worth more than most people earn in a year. Rule 3 nearly got me killed during my 6th week. The Viking at table 7 started singing death songs. Evacuate the pub immediately. It was a busy Friday night. The pub was full of living customers, university students, tourists who'd discover our location through word of mouth, and locals enjoying their usual weekend drinks. Normal, breathing, contemporary people. The Viking had been sitting quietly at table 7 for most of the evening. Massive man, red beard reaching nearly to his waist, wearing furs and leathers that looked like they'd been tanned using methods that predated animal rights legislation. He'd been nursing a horn of mead, actual mead, served in an actual drinking horn, and scribbling in what looked like a runic script on pieces of bark. Around 11 PM, he started singing. Not pub singing, not drunken karaoke, Viking death songs, deep, resonant vocals in Old Norse, telling stories of battles and glory and death in combat. The kind of songs warriors sang before sailing to certain doom, or while dying on distant battlefields. The living customers found it charming at first, a bit of authentic Viking culture, performed by what they assumed was a very committed historical reenactor. Some even started applauding, but I knew better. Rule 3 was explicit. If the death songs start, evacuate immediately. I caught Edmund's eye across the pub. He nodded grimly and began discreetly ushering customers towards the exit, making excuses about gas leaks and health inspections. The Viking's singing grew louder, more intense. The words meant nothing to me, but the emotion behind them was universal. This was a man calling for death to come, inviting valorous combat, preparing for a journey to Valhalla. As the last living customer left the pub, the temperature began to drop. Frost formed on the windows despite it being late spring. The Viking's breath came out in white clouds as he sang, and his eyes began to glow with an inner fire that had nothing to do with alcohol. Other figures began to appear in the pub, translucent warriors carrying axes and shields, all joining in with the death song. A ghostly longship materialised outside the windows, its crew of skeletal Vikings adding their voices to the chorus. The Viking at table 7 stood up, raised his horn of mead, and let out a war cry that shattered every glass in the pub simultaneously. Then, silence. The ghostly warriors faded away, the longship disappeared, the Viking sat back down, finished his mead, left a handful of silver coins on the table, and walked out into the York night as if nothing had happened. Edmund and I spent 2 hours cleaning up broken glass and replacing the windows that had cracked from the supernatural temperature change. "What was that about?" I asked. "Thursdays," Edmund explained. "Thursdays was Fool's Day. Olaf gets nostalgic on Thursdays, especially when there's a full moon." Olaf Bloodaxe, Viking king of Northumbria, died in 954 AD. He's been coming here every Thursday for over 1,000 years. Usually he's quiet, just drinks his mead and writes poetry, but sometimes the old warrior spirit takes hold, and we just let him terrify our customers. Thomas, Olaf died in battle defending York from invasion. This is his city as much as ours. More, actually, considering how long he's been here. we work around his schedule, not the other way around. Winter in York is different when you work at the Blackfriars Rest. The ancient city becomes more itself during the dark months, more medieval, more supernatural, more dangerous. The walls between past and present grow thinner, and customers from different centuries begin to overlap in ways that can be deadly for the living. Rule 5 nearly broke my heart during December. Children from the workhouse fire will ask for milk. We don't have milk. Give them water and they'll understand. They appeared on the winter solace, just as Edmund had warned me they would. 7 children, ages ranging from perhaps 6 to 12, wearing the rough clothes of Victorian workhouse inmates. Their faces were pale, their eyes hollow, and they were moved with uncertain steps of people who hadn't been alive for over a century. The workhouse fire of 1837 was one of York's forgotten tragedies. Overcrowded, underfunded, criminally negligent. When the fire started in the kitchen, 31 children died, not because they couldn't escape, but because they were locked in dormitories to prevent theft. The children approached the bar in single file, the eldest speaking for the group. "Please, sir," she said in an accent that belonged to Dickens' novel, "could we have some more milk? We're ever so thirsty, and the smoke makes our throats hurt something terrible." Every human instinct told me to help them, to give them whatever they needed. They were children, they were suffering, they deserved comfort and care. But Rule 5 was explicit. We don't have milk. Give them water. I'm sorry," I said, pouring 7 glasses of water. "We don't have milk, but this water is fresh and clean." The eldest child nodded sadly. "We understand, sir. Thank you for the water." They drank gratefully, the water seeming to ease some invisible pain. When they finished, they curtsied and bowed like children from a bygone era, then walked hand in hand towards the pub's fireplace. One by one, they stepped into the flames and disappeared. "Why can't we give them milk?" I asked Edmund later. "Because they're not really thirsty," he explained. "They're asking for what they needed when they died. Comfort, care, someone to notice they were suffering. Milk represents the maternal care they were never received. But if you give them what they're really asking for, if you try to fill that void, they'll never move on. They'll stay forever, trapped in that moment of need." So we just give them water. We give them acknowledgement, recognition. Someone sees them, someone cares enough to respond. Even if we can't give them what they truly want, it's enough to ease their pain for another year. Rule 6 came into play during New Year's Eve. When the clock strikes 13, stop serving everyone except the plague doctor. The Blackfriars Rest doesn't close for holidays. Christmas, New Year's, Easter. The dead don't observe contemporary celebrations. But New Year's Eve is different. Something about the transition from one year to another creates temporal instabilities that affect our more persistent customers. The pub was busy that night. Living customers celebrating the new year, dead customers going about their usual business. Everyone coexisting in the careful balance that makes the Blackfriars Rest function. As midnight approached, I noticed something strange. The antique clock on the pub wall, a beautiful piece from the 1600s that Edmund claimed had never been wrong, was running slow. 11:58, 11:59, 12, and then 12:01, 12:02, continually past midnight without acknowledging the new year. The living customers were counting down based on their phones and watches. 10, 9, 8, but the pub clock kept ticking. 12:10, 12:11, 12:12, 7, 6, 5, 12:13. The clock struck 13 times. The moment the 13th chime faded, every living customer in the pub froze. Not metaphorically, literally, they stopped moving, stopped breathing, stopped existing in any meaningful sense. They became statues, frozen in whatever position they'd been in when the impossible hour began. The dead customers, however, became more solid, more real. The Romans laughed louder, the Vikings sung battle songs, medieval monks engaged in theological debates that echoed through the suddenly silent pub, and in the corner, Dr. Marulbus raised his glass to me in what might have been a toast. "The 13th hour," he said, his voice clear without the muffling of the plague mask. "When time forgets itself and the dead remembers what it's like to be alive." For 1 hour, I served drinks to customers from across York's history while the living world waited in suspended animation. Romans discussed politics with Viking warriors, medieval merchants argued about trade routes with Victorian factory workers. It was the most surreal and wonderful hour of my life. When the clock struck 1, everything returned to normal. The living customers resumed their countdown. 4, 3, 2, 1, Happy New Year! Unaware that they'd just lost an hour to the temporal impossibility. The crisis came during the week leading up to St. George's Day, almost exactly 1 year after I started working at the Blackfriars Rest. April in York is when the city's history becomes most active. Something about the spring equinox and the patron saint's day creates a perfect storm of supernatural activity. All week, the signs have been building. Dr. Marulbus appeared every night instead of his usual twice-weekly visits. The Roman soldiers have been joined by additional legions, turning the pub into a temporary military camp. Olaf the Viking was singing death songs nightly, calling forth entire crews of knightly warriors. But the real problem started with Rule 7. The woman in white always sits alone, never approach her table, never speak to her. For 11 months, I'd occasionally seen her, beautiful woman in an elaborate white dress that looked like a wedding gown from the 1800s. She sat at the same corner table, never ordered drinks, never spoke to anyone. Edmund had told me she was Lady Catherine Pemberton, who died on her wedding day in 1847 when her carriage crashed on the way to York Minster. "She's waiting," he'd explain. "She's waiting for her wedding to begin. Don't acknowledge her, don't try to help. She's trapped in that moment before tragedy, and any interaction pulls her forward into knowledge of her death." But on April the 22nd, she began to change. Instead of sitting quietly, she started looking around the pub. Instead of staring at nothing, she began making eye contact with customers. Instead of silence, she began to speak. "Excuse me," she said to one of the Roman soldiers. "Have you seen my carriage? I'm going to be late for my wedding." The Roman, a veteran of 1,000 supernatural encounters, politely shook his head and returned to his wine. She tried the Viking next. Sir, could you direct me to York Minster? I'm expected there shortly." Olaf growled something in Old Norse that sounded distinctly uncomfortable. Finally, she approached the bar. Young man," she said to me, her voice carrying the refined accent of Victorian high society. "I seem to be confused about the time. Could you tell me when my carriage will arrive?" Rule 7 was explicit, never speak to her, but she was looking directly at me, waiting for an answer, and every instinct told me to help this clearly distressed woman. "I'm sorry," I said. "I don't know anything about a carriage." The moment I spoke to her, her expression changed. The confusion left her eyes, replaced by a terrible clarity. "Oh," she said softly. "Oh no, it's happened, hasn't it? The accident. I'm dead." The temperature in the pub plummeted. Every glass began to frost over. and the fire in the fireplace flared so high it nearly reached the ceiling. "I died," Lady Catherine said, her voice growing stronger, more desperate. "I died on my wedding day. I never got married. I never had children. I never lived at all." The other supernatural customers began to react. Dr. Marauba stood up from his table, his plague mask gleaming in the firelight. The Romans reached for weapons that had killed men 2,000 years ago. Olaf started singing what sounded distinctly like a funeral song. "This isn't fair," Lady Catherine said, and her wedding dress began to change. The white fabric turned grey, then black, then began to rot and decay. "I was going to be happy. We were going to be so happy together." The pub windows began to crack from the supernatural cold. The fire roared higher, casting dancing shadows that moved independently of their sources. "Where is he?" Lady Catherine demanded, her beautiful face contorting with rage and grief. "Where is my husband? Where is the life I was promised?" That's when I understood. Lady Catherine wasn't just a ghost. She was a temporal wound, a moment of pure potential that had been violently severed. And now that she knew she was dead, that potential was turning destructive. The pub began to shake, not earthquake shaking, reality shaking, as if the building was being pulled in different directions by different centuries. I could see through the walls the different versions of the pub, the way it looked in 1387, 1600s, 1837, 1847. "Everyone out," Edmund shouted, appearing from the cellar with what looked like a medieval priest's vestment and a collection of religious artifacts that definitely didn't come from any modern church. But the dead customers couldn't leave. They were part of York's history, and history doesn't evacuate. Only the living could escape, and there were only 3 of us: Edmund, myself, and Sarah, the evening barmaid who'd been working here for 15 years. Lady Catherine rose from her table, and as she did, the temperature dropped further. Ice began forming on the walls, and the ancient wooden beams cracked under supernatural pressure. "I want my wedding," she said, a voice now echoing with authority of someone who had been denied justice for over a century. "I want my life. I want what was stolen from me." Edmund began chanting in Latin, holding up a crucifix that looked like it had been carved from the same wood as the pub's original beams. But Lady Catherine was beyond religious intervention now. She had moved past grief into pure, destructive rage. The other supernatural customers began to respond to her emotion. Dr. Marauba removed his plague mask, revealing a face that bore the scars of every disease he'd failed to cure. The Romans drew their weapons, their eyes reflecting the lights of battles they'd never finished fighting. Olaf raised his axe and let out a war cry that shattered the remaining intact glass in the pub. Every ghost in the Blackfriars Rest was feeding off Lady Catherine's rage, becoming more solid, more dangerous, more real. That's when I remember something Edmund told me months ago. "York's ghosts aren't just memories," he said. "They're part of the city's consciousness. They're all connected." If Lady Catherine's rage was affecting every supernatural customer, then maybe the reverse was also true. I walked towards her, ignoring Edmund's shouts of warning. "Lady Catherine," I said, "you're right. It isn't fair. You were robbed of your life, your future, your happiness. But look around you." She turned to stare at me, her eyes now completely black with supernatural fury. "Look at your companions," I continued. "Dr. Marauba lost his family to plague, but he spent 600 years studying disease, helping people he'd never met. The Roman soldiers died far from home, but they protected York for 2,000 years. Olaf died in battle, but he defended this city from spiritual threats for a millennium." "What does that matter?" she snarled. "They found purpose in death. They turned tragedy into service. You could do the same." For a moment, her rage flickered. What do you mean? York is full of people who die young, who die tragically, who die with dreams unfulfilled. You understand that pain better than anyone. You could help them, guide them, show them how to find peace. Lady Catherine stared at me for what felt like hours. Around us, the other supernatural customers watched in absolute silence. Finally, she spoke. You think I should become a counsellor for the dead? I think you should become what you were meant to be, not a wife, not a victim, but a force for good in this city. The black faded from her eyes. Her rotting wedding dress slowly returned to pristine white. The temperature in the pub began to rise. Will you help me? She asked. We all will, Edmund said, lowering the crucifix. That's what we do here, we help. The next morning, I found Lady Catherine sitting at her usual table, but she looked different. Not waiting anymore, not trapped in the moment before tragedy. She looked purposeful, determined, alive in a way that had nothing to do with breathing. Thomas, she said when she saw me, I've been thinking about what you said, about finding purpose. And there's a young woman who died in a car crash last week. She's been wandering the streets, confused and frightened. I thought I might speak with her, help her understand what happened. That sounds like a good start. Dr. Mororbus has offered to teach me about the transition between life and death. He says understanding the medical aspects helps with the emotional ones. From that day forward, Lady Catherine became something new in York's supernatural community. Not just a ghost, but a guide. Someone who helped newly dead souls understand their situation and find their own purpose in the afterlife. The change affected the entire pub. Supernatural customers became more cooperative, more integrated with the living world. Dr. Mororbus started sharing his medical knowledge with local doctors, appearing in dreams to suggest treatments that might not have been considered. The Roman soldiers began patrolling York Street at night, protecting the living from supernatural threats they were uniquely qualified to handle. Even Olaf became more social, occasionally regaling living customers with stories of Viking York. Though Edmund instituted a strict no death songs after 10 PM policy. You change things, Edmund told me after we cleaned up after a particularly busy evening. Not just for Lady Catherine, but for all of them. You reminded them that death doesn't have to be the end of contribution. I just treated them like people instead of problems. That's exactly right. And that's why the Blackfriars Rest works. We don't just serve drinks to the dead, we provide them with community, purpose, acceptance. I still work at the Blackfriars Rest. 3 years later, I've served drinks to customers from every era of York's history. I've learned to read emotions in faces that haven't been alive for centuries, to understand needs that transcend morality, to provide service that goes far beyond pouring pints and collecting payment. The rules are still there, still important, still the difference between a successful evening and a supernatural disaster, but I understand them now not as restrictions, but as guidelines for coexistence, ways to respect the dead while serving the living, to honour the past while managing the present. York is Britain's most haunted city because it's Britain's most accepting city. Here, death is just another kind of residency status. The dead pay taxes in historical currency, contribute to community through supernatural services, and participate in the social fabric of a city that never forgot its history. If you ever visit York, you might catch a glimpse of the Blackfriars Rest. It's in an alley off Stonegate, behind what looks like a Tudor residence. Look for the oak door with iron hinges, the small wooden plaque that says Est 1387. We're open every night from sunset to dawn. We serve the finest ales in York, wine that would impress Roman emperors, and mead that satisfies Viking warriors. Our customer service has been rated excellent by patrons across 2 millennia, and if you're very lucky, you might meet some of our regulars. Dr. Mororbus, still studying disease after 600 years. Olaf Bloodaxe, writing poetry in Old Norse. Lady Catherine, helping newly deceased souls find their purpose in the afterlife. Just remember the rules. Always serve the plague doctor as usual. Never ask the Romans about their legion. If the Vikings start singing death songs, step outside for a moment. And most importantly, remember that death is just another way of being a local. In York, we serve everyone, regardless of their current state of morality. Sweet dreams, and mind the cobblestones. They've seen more history than most buildings.